where do we start? What's happened? What's happening? What's going on in the world of rugby league that we can possibly talk about on this Tuesday afternoon? It's good job we've moved it to Tuesday.
I don't think I've ever been more mystified.
But I think just the link to go back to the Pride shirt and to make this a Pride event, but clearly there's been a big story today around Marcus Griffiths and the abuse he's received following Sunday's game, online homophobic abuse, and sadly, speaking from personal experience, that's all too common, and certainly was all too common when I refereed, and that was one of the reasons why I spoke publicly about it when I did back in 2021 to try and to actually reduce it, and it did reduce it at the games. There was a bar one experience, I think that was really it. But online, still used to get homophobic abuse, and when people sort of say, "Oh, why do you still have Pride events? Why do people even speak about being gay and all that? Is it really relevant?" Well, unfortunately, situations like that show that it's still relevant, and actually good on Marcus for making it public, because there's so many messages that he will have received in the past and not, just the same as I have, and lots of other people will have online. And just because it's online shouldn't diminish it in any way. So the events that Keighley and Salford did at the weekend, and other clubs in the past, and I think actually York and Newcastle were involved in another Pride event this weekend up in Newcastle, a repeat of what they did at York earlier on in the year. So I just think that's unfortunately the reason why it still remains relevant today, and irrespective of whether a decision was right or wrong, shouldn't matter. Well,
he's tweeted a particular abusive conversation that it's not a conversation, it's
a very one-sided conversation.
A rant
that somebody sent, and the only way of identifying that person is through Twitter themselves. So the first obligation has to be that if they are serious about policing their social media site,
I think, but in fairness to Twitter, I think this was Instagram, but he should report it through Instagram.
And so yes, clubs have a responsibility. If it's a named person that clearly is affiliated to that club as a fan, they need to take action. The game also needs to take action against that person. But in this instance, where they're almost unidentifiable, then it's the social media platform that has to take action. It'd be very disappointing if they don't.
Yeah, I mean, it never ceased to amaze me that actually some people were even prepared to put their name to it and abuse me, particularly through Facebook, by putting their name to it. I even had a friend request from somebody this week that has abused me online. It's just insane.
So where does the hypocrisy begin and end, and where does the blame begin and end? Because we were talking about that before coming on air, and clearly one of the reasons this has happened is because clips of the game with contentious moments, allegedly, in it, or
clips are increasingly finding their way on social media.
Where have the clips come from?
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that there's referees' audio on at least one of the clips, which means that's come from...
It's come from somebody with access to Opta, basically.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's through a club or any other means.
So that needs to be... it's all very well the RFL kept coming out and saying we
that's very difficult to police, by the way.
But that's an investigation that needs to be made. Then what does the role of those people that are putting up the clips there to gain a reaction from their audience? Where does that responsibility begin and end, and how do you police that?
Well, we know what that's all about. That's to gain clicks, to gain comments, to gain traction on social media. But I mean, it's just nonsense.
But so again, how do you police that? Because you're not putting it up there and saying we're writing a 500-word article about the reasons behind this decision. What we're doing is saying there's a clip, instantaneous judgment, somebody's got something wrong, aren't they crap? Well, does their media accreditation need to be looked at if the governing body is serious about and this isn't aimed at any particular outlet, I'm just saying
good choice of words there.
It's very, very easy for a governing body to issue a statement saying we condemn. What can we do about it?
No, you're absolutely right to ask that question. And I mean, there are certain things that are easier to deal with than others. So, coaches' comments criticising referees publicly, right? That's a breach of operational rules.
But on that one, so there's a major incident in a game that may or may not have come late in the game and been an issue of determining who may or may not have won that game. In this case, it didn't, but let's assume it does. it would be naive to think that any member of the media that wasn't worth their salt would ask the coach their opinion of that incident. Now, if you report the coach's reply to that, and the coach is measured in his response and has had a chance to make, because all the coaches have footage next to them, and has talked to people, and it may well be that somebody has made a genuine mistake. I'm not sure you can blame the coach's comments as the initial starting point for all of this. They have been asked the question, and the media have to ask that question. That is a valid news.
Yes, the way in which comments are made, isn't it? Or we've seen other games and on other occasions where it's,
Well, Ricky Stewart's done it this round.
And in fairness, Paul Rowley's comments the other week, that was not done with respect at all.
No.
That got
so
to
I think
a personal level.
Coaches commenting on referees. That in itself, I don't think is an issue. It's how you comment,
and it shouldn't be an excuse to open the floodgates for anybody then to have a pop at a referee online.
But people putting clips out from single angles, determining that a wrong decision has been made in order to get a response, the Pavlovian extension of that response then becomes abuse of the referee. How do you stop that? Do the media have some responsibility?
If some of the same journalists are then, tweeting today about the about the absurdity of the abuse, but actually they play a part in it.
I've been told off. I'm assuming you've been told off, Phil, for things we've said on this podcast, which I don't think have been unfair comments. Or if they have been,
I think there's a difference between opinion and opinion is exactly that. As a famous comedian once said, opinion is like arseholes. Everybody has one.
Rectums of Wigan. We're back to that.
But I think you have to be able to justify your opinion, and people don't have to agree with your opinion, but you have to make as intellectual a case as you can as to why you have that stance on that. Putting up a clip and going, well, you judge, but clearly a mistake's been made.
Clubs frequently criticise referees' decisions in play when they do their live social media.
Yeah.
Has any club been sanctioned for that criticism?
And if they have,
it's not been publicly announced.
That's the bit that's missing.
When players during televised games criticise referees' decisions, have any of them been sanctioned for those? And again, have they been sanctioned publicly? When any members of the media have called out match officials, referees, touch judges, timekeepers, whatever, have they been sanctioned for not an opinion, for direct...
It's abuse.
Calling out abuse, saying someone is not on the level. That's the word I'll use. No, they haven't, have they? Because they're still... you can see them at games, you can see them everywhere. So there's no accountability. Anyone can do whatever they want, and, we've got a great collective amnesia in rugby league about some people involved and things they've done in the past, and they're allowed to do whatever they want, and it's open season. So why then? No, we can't start now. We've got to go back and...
Well, unless they have been sanctioned, it's not being publicised. But then why sanction in the first place? Because one of the reasons for sanctioning is to stop other people from doing it. And we've discussed before on this podcast this year about players and criticism on social media. And I went away and checked the operational rules, and actually they're not breaching operational rules as it currently stands. But if they're not questioning the integrity of the match official, which I don't agree, I think that needs changing. I don't think it's right that players should be questioning decisions on social media. If they want to question decisions and get answers to decisions, there's a process that they can go through behind the scenes. That doesn't do the game, in my view, any good. That's not to say that match officials are above criticism. No. They're not. No. But as an active player in a competition, I don't see what that adds to the competition. If I, as an active referee, and I said this before, but if I, as an active referee, started making similar comments on social media about players during their performances of live games, I'm pretty damn sure action would have been taken against me.
Did any media outlet put a clip of a player of a club dropping a ball with the line open and saying...
When we accept our accreditation at the start of the year, we have to agree to the terms and conditions, which people probably don't read. But I'm sure when I've read them before, it's interesting because you're not really supposed to take pictures within the stadium when the game's on and such, because that's photographers and they pay for the right to do that or whatever. But everyone does, because that's what everyone does these days. But I'm fairly sure you're not supposed to take clips of matches and put them out, because you're not a rights holder. You know, otherwise I could just make videos every week of here's the best tries in Super League this week. I'm going to put them on the internet and monetize it and make 4 pence myself, because then it's open season. I can do that. Well, I can't do that, can I? So what's the difference between me putting out here's a great clip of, and you know what, I probably have used clips of something in the past, although it's probably tries rather than when I put a clip of Danica scoring a try for Leeds against Wakefield. Now, Forty20 is not the rights holder of the Women's Super League. I was doing commentary of the game for the club, so it's murky. I probably should have done it, but I did, because I'm a rebel. But, you know,
if you're going to have a condemnatory statement, there has to be action that backs it up. And if that means an investigation into how clips have been allowed to be used, and that has that contravenes whatever the agreement is or whoever the rights holder is, that has to be taken into account when some form of punishment is meted out. Now, whether that's fine or accreditation withheld or
especially
whatever.
When we're moaning about whatever Sky are or aren't going to pay for the TV rights, if we're undermining them by putting our own clips.
Well, we've seen this before. I remember talking about a club doctor this season posting footage online of incidents of alleged foul play and inaction by match officials, and I said at the time I thought that was wholly inappropriate, and that for me should have been sanctioned.
I agree. I also think that there needs to be a look for agencies that purport to be using news stories, pandering to the lowest common denominator, and they're going to say, oh, it's all about the number of people and this is what people want. Sometimes what people want is what you give them, and I think there does need to be some kind of standards driven look at whether that is appropriate content, which is not easy for one particular outlet to make that decision. The whole of the media need to be briefed on what is and isn't acceptable in terms of, we laugh about it. Words like legend and star and exclusive are all ridiculously overused, and to the point where they don't mean anything. So clubs are now signing players from the NRL who we are told are big stars, and you look at their record and you go, well, they're not, because they've only played 25 games and they actually can't get into their current team at the moment, and their current team is one of the lower ranked teams. So, do we need to, even as a society, to be reining in this desire to shout loud but with no substance behind it?
Well, I agree. It's just how you change things, and to take it away from referees a little bit, because I'm conscious that it shouldn't just be about referees, because Andy Lass, that was discussed only a few weeks ago, and the abuse he'd received from his own supporters. Yeah. It's just ridiculous.
Well, and a lot of so-called fans who jump on a bandwagon that it's all the referee's fault. Also, if you look through their history of tweets, are abusive even to their own players, more than the opposition players. Why have we signed them? He's rubbish, or the recruitment at our club is awful. They're not good enough to put on the shirt. It's all that thin end of the same wedge.
Yeah. I'm not sure that in the behaviour and standards section of the terms and conditions for media accredited people, would you say respect and recognise the roles played by all matchday staff and volunteers would then say you can't really call the timekeeper?
It needs to be more specific.
Where appropriate attire at all times, club replica jerseys must not be worn in any media area.
Unless you represent a club, in which case it's fine.
Not be under the influence of alcohol or any substance. I've seen people drinking beer in mix zones.
Not wrestling in mixed zones, were they?
It was great. Oh, we've got to talk about that later. Not misuse their access their accreditation provides by seeking autographs, photographs, memorabilia requests, etc. with players or coaches. Apart from Scully was allowed to do that because he's in the Hall of Fame.
I just think unless if you have standards, apply them. If you don't have standards, write them in, because this is becoming now an issue that you cannot just say, we condemn it.
Yeah, we've seen it before. I saw it was an active match for sure, and it's like anything. It's like Premier League football. If you allow it to slip, it will slip and slip and slip.
So it has.
everybody's trying to define culture because it's a word again that is overused, but without anybody saying what it is. One of it is you set your standards and you stick to them, and that doesn't happen in a lot of cases. And here, I don't know if journalistic standards are slipping, but I do think that an episode like this means every media outlet should look at their output and say, are we doing right by ourselves to be credible and the sport that we purport to cover?
I mean, just to widen the subject a little bit, if we go into some of the comments perhaps that have come in, is just that without wishing to publicise another podcast, but I did listen to another Rugby League podcast this week.
Depends who it is.
It was the Super League's podcast.
It's the official one. That's we can't say anything about.
And Ryan Briley's interview was. I mean, they have some really good interviews on there. But Ryan Briley's interview was really enlightening and talking about the way in which he was treated at Toronto. By staff involved there, and for me, that is totally unacceptable in any walk of life, and that shouldn't be accepted as the norm. To be mistreated in the way he was, and basically cast adrift and if we mistreat him, he'll hopefully leave because he's got a 2-year contract. I mean, that's just really, really poor form.
You can't do
that. And speaking to people in the way in which he said he was spoken to by coaching staff, for me is totally unacceptable. And we're talking about people sort of on the fringe, if you like, fans and journalists. I'm talking about now people actually in the game, directly employed within the sport, within clubs. That's unacceptable behaviour in 2023.
It is part of our problem then, and people. I know some people aren't going to like what I'm going to say here, so I'm trying to work out how to say it. And we are the most woke Rugby League podcast there is. I'm fairly sure. I'm fairly sure we are. Is one of the problems in Rugby League, and this goes back to the head injuries. It goes back to shoulder charges. It goes back to everything. That the game's gone soft, and that era of when it was hard and they're all hard men and blah blah blah. A, probably never existed really. But B, that mythology we've built up, if we admit any kind of weakness or softness, then it goes against what we are. We are hard. We are whatever Rugby League stood for, and probably isn't and hasn't been for a long time.
I don't know. Things change in over time. Everything changes over time, and what's considered to be hard.
I don't know. In terms of the way management may behave, which may reflect on the comments somebody else has said in which we've got.
I think you still see archaic forms of coaching. I've seen it firsthand. For me, that shouldn't have a place in the way in which any form of work that shouldn't just because you work in rugby league and you work in sport and you're a bloke and you should be macho and all the rest of it and you should be able to take it. Well, that's nonsense.
No, you said that. It reminds me of a kids' final was recently where one of the coaches was behaving in that form, and you're thinking, what?
I've not seen the film, but I've seen the clip. With goodness me, what's the football film called we talked about the other week?
Mike Bassett again.
Mike Bassett. It's funny. It's funny, but actually some of that still goes on. And it really shouldn't. And I just speak, that listening to Ryan Briley's story for me, as just that again, as I said, is on a sort of a wider topic of generally and how we deal with each other as a society. Really, that for me, it should not be acceptable and should not be considered as it was in the podcast by Ryan and by Kyler Moore. That actually that's the standard. That's what we expect. That shouldn't be. That's we should be better than
that. Some comments. Liz, I hope the RFL fine. Even I can't speak. It's not good, is it? Your man. What did he say on Twitter? Did he say something bad? Sam, your Leeds. Your play deleted his tweet.
Sam Lee.
Yeah, what did he say?
He said referees just need to be accountable.
No, he didn't say the crap or anything. No.
But they are accountable. I mean, referees the appointments are influenced each week by performances on field. Whether people notice that or not, but they are.
It's probably the tamest tweet anyone's said about a referee. But at least he deleted it. So, but the RFL are going to look into it. Well, if they do sanction him for that, then there's a lot to go back on that they could easily say. Well, because we've seen in football in the past where a player gets a move to a big club and the fans of that club don't like it, so they'll dig through his old tweets, find something he said when he was 16 or 17 which he shouldn't have said, and they get fined and banned for things they've said in the past. So if we are going open season on players and what they've tweeted, then there's a lot of people going to be in a lot of trouble. So
he just
can't
needs
wait for that.
to be told that referees are accountable.
Teddy Ruxby. Anyone employed in Rugby League who publicly criticises referees, spoken or in written form, should be fined and or suspended. I'm going to suspend you from the podcast. It's not even my podcast.
Why? What did I say?
I don't know. Ban everyone. Ban everyone. It's just going to be me on my own. Given that Warrington won, does this mean the end of Warrington Corner? No, we'll find something to criticise Warrington about, though. Kevin says, seems respect for the referee in Rugby League is diminishing. Is that just again, it's a general
I don't think
in
it's
the world
just the
at
referee in
large?
Rugby League. I think post-pandemic, where we all thought everybody would come together because we'd all missed each other and community would be reignited, the absolute opposite has happened.
Yeah, I've written about it in the magazine, haven't I, in the last few months about other sports and the abuse that's been received, not just towards referees as well, but as a society, that's the way we're heading, unfortunately.
All good points, says Tim, regarding the responsibilities of players, coaches, media and social media users. Quick question, have the RFL concluded their investigation into running of the referees department? No.
Well, again, that is all part of, if abuse is an issue, where does it begin and end?
Karen also says, agree Rich, the game's changed massively, some for the better, some not, but that's everything, isn't it? Nothing is the same as it was. Are there enough referees though for them to be held accountable, as in if they keep having shockers? We should mark them out of 10, like they do the players, mark the referees out of 10.
Look, there is a challenge around the level of experience, as we've discussed before. Robert Hicks finished, he was on the podcast today. He refereed over 300 odd games in Super League, as did I. That's over 600 odd, nearly 700 games of Super League experience refereeing, whether you think we're any good or not. Facts are, you've lost 2 referees with over 300 odd games each in terms of experience.
And Marcus is almost at the beginning of his journey by comparison.
He's probably refereed in Super League maybe 3 years, something like that. I'm guessing maybe a little bit more. But
I think the other thing is, if we are going to get video referees at every game, then you might have to come out of retirement, because the worry would be that you are going to need some pretty experienced people to act in that capacity. It's not just I played the game, therefore I can be a video referee.
One of the effects is that if they don't use active officials, if they want to use active officials as video referees, as has generally been the want, then it means that those active officials that are full-time referees who touch judge as well as video referee, they won't probably touch judge anymore, which then means you're relying on just a part-time group of match officials to touch judge Super League. I mean, people have their own views on touch judges, but a lot of that is through ignorance, because most people don't appreciate the role of a touch judge and the level of input they give. And I think there's a big education piece the RFL could do there, similar to what the VAR have done this year with football, is actually to show people, to release some of that audio to the public, to show the level of input that touch judges give and the support that they give to the on-field officials. So you're right, if they don't start using sort of retired or off-field people to video referee, then it will have a greater impact. But they have lost some experience for various reasons.
To spread the matches over a weekend, because otherwise, if you've got 4 games on a Friday and they've all got video refs, you are going to struggle to have enough personnel. I think they can still manage it by having active officials as video referees, but it will potentially have a knock-on effect for them not then touch judging.
Does that mean we get rid of the in-goal judges then?
The in-goal judges would go, yeah. So
they can't tell you if it's a drop goal or not.
But there was a clip going on, I think Huddersfield did the rounds on that, didn't they? From probably about 10 years ago.
Danny Brough dropping a goal against St Helens that wasn't given.
Well, and 2 camera angles there, both directly behind the post, one at either end. And actually, they tell you probably slightly different stories. But what you can't determine from that is at which point the ball is directly above or in front or behind the posts. And one of the problems there is that the posts are relatively short at Huddersfield. So even with extra camera angles, you can't always tell. So with a video referee, I don't think under next season's situation, I don't think it would have helped, because I don't imagine under that production they would have cameras directly behind the post. I suspect they would probably just have corner angles. So I don't think there would have been an angle to determine it, because the footage is relatively inconclusive, and I think you have to rely on somebody who's behind the posts in a great position to make that decision.
Taller posts, different coloured balls,
nets.
You
could have flashing lights like I think they have in the NRL and all sorts when the ball goes
like
through.
In ice hockey, they have someone behind the goal who puts a light on if the puck crosses the line. That's their job.
Yeah, the goal line television.
Control the drop goals.
Do an IMG's job for me.
All those. Well, we've got to slag off IMG next, haven't we? Because they're rubbish. Carl Kirkpatrick was a good referee, says Kevin. Don't ask Wakefield supporters about that, especially the woman with the umbrella chasing off the pitch. At least they're not chasing Marcus Griffiths off the pitch with an umbrella. So,
I have to say, having been at that game, it was a really difficult game to referee. It had a cup tie atmosphere to it because
massive crowd and everything.
Not as massive as they would have liked, but clearly almost last chance saloon for both teams. There was something like 12 penalties and 10 set restarts, so that's 22 stoppages in 80 minutes. So it became increasingly fractious. It was a tough game to control, and both sides have to take a relative degree of responsibility for that. But whatever incidents you show on social media are not the only incidents that determine the outcome of that game. It can't possibly be that way.
And I've seen clips that are on there. And you read some of the comments of people talking about potential forward passes. They've never seen forward passes in the memory of man. Literally, they must be watching something else. And then there was a try that Huddersfield scored that Leeds complained about. I have no idea why, because he wasn't held. The ball carrying arm isn't down, and it's clearly a try.
Entitled.
Video ref or no video referee, it's clearly a try. So,
but it's how you respond to those decisions. If you feel there's been a great sense of injustice, the onus is still on you to be a disciplined team to overcome that.
Yeah.
And if both teams hadn't performed relatively poorly this season over the length of the season, that game wouldn't have been a must-win game.
Yeah.
So there's an element of responsibility that each club has to take for the way a game.
I mean, I go back with something.
And you wrote about it in your cup final piece. How do you referee it? Well, it's
down to the players.
It depends on how the players play it.
By and large, it's down to the players.
And it was a really fractious game yesterday.
And you could see that in the Catalan-Wigan game. If I knew the result when I was watching it, and so I didn't watch the second half. It was an awful game to watch and an awful game to referee.
An awful pitch.
Yeah, on an awful pitch. I just felt sorry for Liam because I've had games like that, particularly at Catalan before, where you're almost you don't know which tactic to take to adopt in order to try and get the best out of the game that you can possibly get. Because no matter what you do, it seems to add levels of frustration. So a lot of that, as I've said, just goes back to the players and the coach's responsibility to maintain control and discipline.
So Leeds scored no second half points in this match.
No, and Huddersfield scored 3.
And it's all down to this one drop goal which was Leeds lost.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say there, in defence on Rowan Smith, he didn't say that was the reason why they lost.
No, he didn't.
And so for people to extrapolate that,
he was asked
nonsense.
a direct question about that incident.
Yeah, and I don't think. Look, his comments, I don't think were unacceptable.
No, there were no way. They weren't abusive. They didn't blame the match official, and he was clearly you can read any situation you want to read. If you looked at the Huddersfield players at the moment that drop goal went over, they didn't automatically assume that they needed to run back into their own half, because some of them stood on the 20-metre line because they thought it had missed. Well, Rowan Smith commenting on that is not abuse. But
he did comment about the ruck though, and it being a potential lottery.
He only talks about that every week.
I was going to say he talks about that every other week at least. Yeah.
A lottery.
Do you think Six again has got something to answer for?
Well, we've discussed it before.
Because the one thing about penalties, that are given for things like foul play, is that they're virtually incontrovertible. You've either tackled somebody high or you haven't, and whether it comes off the ball or whether there's malice involved, as a match official, you virtually have a situation of black and white. A head has been hit, and that's no longer There is an element of interpretation in the Six again that nobody on the terraces can fully understand, and always think that their club isn't getting the rub of the green.
Yeah, but what I would say to that is that was exactly the same when it was penalties, because there's an element of interpretation to how you officiate the ruck, whether you decide to penalise something or give a 6 again, there's an element of discretion in there. To some are more discretionary than others. Some are almost mandatory, particularly when that ball comes out and you can't play on. You're forced to give a decision. But people were still just as baffled when the referee gave a penalty. Now, the referee could give a signal, so he could signal a leg pull, he could signal hand on ball. He can't signal that anymore. So people at least now don't know why he's given it.
Yeah.
So I think there's an element of that around it. But even if when you give a signal, people will disagree with the decision anyway. So
it's the whole concept of what constitutes laying on more than anything.
But that just for me just comes back to education, to try and educate the public, and the more engagement that you do with the public to try and demonstrate why something is given or why something isn't given, then you will help people to understand. And if people don't understand, then they get confused and then they get frustrated. So it all comes back to education, and there being a role, in my view, for somebody who understands the laws to explain to the public why decisions are given or not given.
And that's another job you've just given yourself.
Yeah.
On Rod Studd's programme, the RFL did last year.
But what it doesn't want to end up being, though, it doesn't want to end up being like a fess up every week.
No.
Oh, we got that wrong, we got this wrong. Or we got,
does it want to be a focus on that?
No.
The focus has to be on either the great entertaining play that we've witnessed, or the club's responsibility for not winning the games.
And one of the things around the ruck, which Rowan Smith referenced in his comments, was about the play the ball and players not playing the ball. And that has been around ever since I've been a referee. And our play the balls are not good enough. I accept that. They're not as good as the NRL in terms of the standard. But to try and change that is unpicking a generation or more of players that have never played the ball with the foot.
You can't do it during the season either.
And we talk about these concussion trials and academy games and stuff, to then try and rectify that in a 6-week pre-season leading into games. And I know exactly what would happen. You'd end up giving a load of penalties early doors in the first few rounds, not playing the ball correctly, and then the public will be up in arms, the TV will be up in arms, and then the referees have to back down, and it's that yet again the referees have backed off something. Well, if you really want to fix something, then stick at it, and stick at it all year, and accept that you're going to have to tolerate a load of penalties and a load of pain and discomfort early doors, and actually also accept that the referee's going to miss some, because there's probably 300 play the balls in a game, and it's yet another decision that the referee has to make from about 12 metres away, considering the angle, whether that player touches that ball with the foot, or if you make it grey and say he has to make an attempt, then what is the intention or the attempt that's the range of acceptability? So it is an absolute minefield. It's not an easy fix. I agree, if you fixed it though, it would give greater stability to that ruck, slow the ruck down a little bit and give greater control and tidy the ruck up. But
and what we don't realise here, symptomatically we've gone back and said, well, here's the problem that's happened, but we have done nothing about it, so here's where we are now. And that's exactly what we were talking about in the start. And everything will be like scrums, where it's completely pointless. You just get the big people out of the way for a bit, because no one puts them in the middle row anymore.